In this video, I'm going to be talking about two lighthouses I purchased recently. One of them is an outdoor light that is a replica of the Assateague Island Lighthouse, and the other one is a lighthouse floor lamp that's a replica of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. But first, here's a brief history of every single outdoor lighthouse I've bought in the past so that we can appreciate just how superior these ones are. The first lighthouse I bought was from Wal-Mart. I don't think they sell these anymore, but it was a short lighthouse with an attached keeper's dwelling, and it had black and white stripes that I'm pretty sure were supposed to mimic the black and white stripes in the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. Personally, I really don't like it when people put these specific stripes on a square lighthouse, but whatever. When I first saw this, I was pleasantly surprised because I did not know that they made lighthouses that you could just place outside of your house and have them turn on at night and off during the day. So this was a really interesting find for me, so I immediately bought it. But unfortunately, very quickly I got extremely disappointed with this thing. I was expecting it to stay on all night, but unfortunately the solar panel that they used was not strong enough to supply enough power to keep the light on at night. I remember one night at around 3 in the morning I checked it to see if it was still on and found out that it was turned off because there was no more power. And one night I actually timed how long the light would last, and it only lasted for about 3 hours before shutting off. Another thing I didn't like about this lighthouse was that it produced a very unprototypical orange light that no lighthouse ever produces. Not only that, but the longer I had the lighthouse, the weaker the solar panel got, and the shorter amount of time the light would stay on at night. So it actually got gradually worse over time. Eventually, I was able to slightly prolong its lifespan by changing its solar-powered batteries, but even that didn't work after a while. This lighthouse unfortunately had another issue working against it: its size. It was a very short structure, and unfortunately, the Lehigh Valley and Pennsylvania in general get a lot of snow during the winter and spring months. Usually about 6 inches, unless you're unlucky enough to have 2 winter storms back to back. During the first winter of having this lighthouse, it was covered in snow that was deeper than its height, sometimes even 3 times as deep as its height. When the snow melted, I would find that the lighthouse would be severely damaged to the point where it was no longer functional. A lot of the metal had been rusted, the solar panel was no longer functional, and the wires that ran from the solar panel to the lighting fixture were completely worn to the point where they could no longer send power. That was the end of that lighthouse, and it was taken out of service shortly after. Later on, I bought a lighthouse similar to this one, but not exactly the same product. The one I bought didn't have solar panels on the roof. Instead, it had a separate structure that had a solar panel on it, and it had a wire that ran from the solar panel to the lighthouse, which meant that you could move the solar panel further away from where the lighthouse was located. Now, at first, I liked the product, even though the light wasn't bright enough, and it also didn't stay on all night all the time, but sometimes it actually did. But unfortunately, this lighthouse had the same issue the previous one had. For some reason, these companies can't seem to figure out how to create wires that can survive being outside. So just like the other one, the wires that ran from the solar panel to the lighthouse stopped working after a while, and they could not send power to the lighthouse anymore. Like, seriously, how hard can it be to make outside wires? Wires that can survive being outside. I just don't get it. After I got rid of this lighthouse, I went on Yahoo Answers and asked, does anyone know of any garden lighthouses that can survive the winter and that have ample power to stay on all night? Unfortunately, no one seemed to care, and all I got was sarcastic answers. Eventually, while on eBay, I randomly found a replica of the Portland Head Lighthouse that was manufactured by Lighthouse Depot. This person was selling it after they had purchased it from the company. A company that no longer exists, by the way. Or at least I don't think it does. I haven't heard anything about it since the early 2000s. Now, I knew the store was closed, so I knew that this was a very rare find, so I decided to try it out. The literal first thing I noticed as soon as this thing arrived was shoddy craftsmanship. The walls slanted upwards at different angles on opposite sides of the lighthouse. That being said, this lighthouse did in fact outperform the other two lighthouses I bought previously. It was able to stay on all night, and it had a rotating beacon. Now, one thing I did not like about the rotating beacon was it rotated way too quickly. It rotated at such a speed that it gave a flash every 1/3 of a second, which is way too fast for a lighthouse. There isn't a single lighthouse on this planet that has a beacon that rotates that quickly. It was immediately clear to me that this model was more of a toy than it was a model. Another thing I didn't like about this lighthouse was that the beacon rotated during the day as well as during the night, which in my opinion felt like it was wasting power that it could have been conserving until nighttime. That being said, it was really rare for it to run out of power at night. However, the light would get noticeably dimmer during the morning. Later on, in an attempt to make the light more efficient, I decided to try and make a makeshift Fresnel lens by taking some shipping tape that was clear and bending it into the shape of a Fresnel lens and wrapping it around the beacon. And that actually worked. It also had the added effect that the weight caused the motor to slow down to a speed that was slightly more realistic. Still way too fast, but at least it wasn't flashing every 1/3 of a second. Eventually, I repainted the lighthouse with black diamond stripes to mimic the Cape Lookout Lighthouse because it wasn't really that believable as the Portland Head Lighthouse. I don't know why, it just didn't look like it at all. Eventually, the real test came when it had to survive a Lehigh Valley winter. Unfortunately, it failed the test. It would come to my knowledge that the lantern was not watertight, so water would get into the lantern room and then freeze, causing the motor to jam up. The light would still come on, but the beacon would not rotate. One day I managed to free the motor by manually rotating the beacon, and it started working again after that, but for some reason it was spinning slower than it was previously, which I actually liked because it made it look a bit more realistic. But unfortunately, eventually it stopped again. After a while, the light wouldn't come on anymore, so I opened the lantern room to see if there were any user serviceable parts inside. Unfortunately, they weren't, and even if they were, the store is closed, so I wouldn't be able to order any new parts for it anyway. And also, just like every single lighthouse before, the wires were frayed because they apparently could not survive being outside during a Lehigh Valley winter. I remember finding it very ironic that a lighthouse that was manufactured in Maine couldn't survive being outside during the winter in Pennsylvania, a place that isn't quite as cold as Maine. Eventually, I felt very discouraged and got rid of this lighthouse as well. Now, years later, while shopping at CVS, I randomly came across this lighthouse, which is also a solar-powered one. I was really skeptical that this flimsy device could ever survive being outside, but I said to myself, well, worst case scenario, if it doesn't work, I'm just out $30, so let's give it a try. As it turned out though, forget surviving a Lehigh Valley winter, this one couldn't even survive the spring. One rainstorm and it was ruined because it wasn't watertight, and apparently nothing inside this outdoor device was waterproof. Also, just like all the other ones, the wires were very flimsy and had very thin insulation, and therefore got easily frayed and could not survive being outside. A common trend with these companies seems to be that they can't get the concept of outdoor wires correctly. Now, I did try repurchasing it because I read a comment online that claimed that if you drilled a hole in the bottom of the device, then all the water that got inside would drain out and therefore the device would still work. I did try that, but it also didn't work. One rainstorm and it was ruined. I never did find out how badly this device would do against a snowstorm. In this video, I'm currently unboxing the Assateague Island Lighthouse from Lighthouse Man. Now, as someone who has worked at UPS and FedEx, I really appreciate how thick this packaging is that these lighthouses arrived in. It looks like it was made to survive the harsh environments of the inside of a shipping warehouse. One really big mess in my front yard later, I did get the box open, and I have the lighthouse outside the box now. The device I'm using to open this package comes from Wal-Mart. It's basically what Wal-Mart employees get for the purpose of opening packages. I also have one from Amazon, but in my opinion, the one from Wal-Mart is more ergonomic. Okay, I got most of the bags off protecting the lighthouse. Now we're unveiling the lantern room. Already, I am super impressed with this lighthouse because this wire looks like it was designed to handle outdoor weather. It looks 1,000 times better than the wires I have found in any other outdoor lighthouse that I've bought. Got windows too, and even a door. The windows and doors are actually the first thing that a lot of neighbors pointed out when they saw this lighthouse for the first time. Right now I'm very carefully lifting it off of the bag. The ground that this lighthouse is sitting on isn't flat, so I'm going to dig a foundation for it and place it inside. This foundation will also prevent it from moving around in the wind. Though, I actually don't think it needs a foundation because it's pretty sturdy compared to others that I've bought in the past. This is the wire that leads to the solar powered device, which I haven't installed yet. One thing I like about this solar powered lighthouse is it's got a nice sturdy cord. I bought a lot in the past that have very flimsy cables that can't survive being outside despite them being outdoor products. But this one looks like it's going to last a long time. Another thing I like about these lighthouses is that all the parts are user serviceable. If for any reason the solar panel were to stop working, I could just buy a new one. This is a luxury that none of the other products that I've bought in the past have. Most of them did not have user serviceable parts, so if they stopped working, your only option was to throw them away. This is usually how I mount outdoor lighthouses to the ground. I dug a small foundation and I'm going to cover the base with dirt, and this is going to help solidify it to the ground. This one's going to have a really strong foundation because I dug up a lot of rocks while digging the foundation. Some of them were placed under the lighthouse for support, and others were placed on top of the base in order to help solidify it to the ground. This lighthouse is pretty sturdy, so this is probably all that's going to be needed to keep it from moving around in the wind. Let me turn it slightly. It's facing the wrong way. I want the door to be facing outward. I made sure not to cover the doorway. Even though it's automated, you still need access to the structure so that inspectors can come in and maintain the beacon. This dirt is nice and heavy, so it should do a good job at providing a strong foundation for this lighthouse. I want to make sure I don't end up covering the doorway, obviously. Yeah, make sure at least you can still get in through the door. Yeah, keep the doorway clear. All right, that's a strong foundation. It's not going anywhere, even if there's some strong winds. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. This thing is really sturdy. See, look at that. I'm shaking it and it's not doing anything. That's really good. It's the most sturdy lighthouse I've ever bought. Now let's start assembling the lighting fixture. Let's see. This should be this right here. And over there, that's a lantern glass. You gotta install this first. Ignore that guy. He does not know what he's talking about. You're actually supposed to install the lantern room first. Now, I did read the instructions wrong and thought you had to install the lighting fixture first, but you're actually supposed to install the lantern room first. Eventually, though, I did realize my error and corrected it. There we go. Okay. Okay, so it looks like obviously this cord attaches to this, and then this goes inside the lantern room. This is the lighting fixture of the lighthouse. It has 3 different settings that you can choose, which is 2 more than any other solar-powered lighthouse I've ever bought. You can choose between a fixed light, which is one that just stays on, one that flashes, and one that rotates. This thing is way better built than any other garden lighthouse I've ever bought. Look at these thick wires. These aren't going to rip like the wires I've got from a lot of store-bought lighthouses from places like Wal-Mart and CVS. These wires look like they're here to stay. Now I just put the wire in here, obviously. Unfortunately, I was too excited to read the directions. The lantern room was supposed to be installed before the lighting fixture. Eventually, though, I did realize my mistake. Okay, the light is now in place. Well, I finally got the lantern installed. And this one's solar powered, so it's wired to that device over there. Now all that's left to do is clean up this garbage. I gotta do it fast too, because the sun's about to set. I have never seen packing peanuts like this before. Like, listen to the way they sound. Like, they don't even sound real. They sound like video game sound effects. It just got dark enough for it to turn on. So here's what it looks like at night. I also have this floor lamp, which is a replica of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. The beacon that this light produces is so powerful that it actually shows up on the walls on the other side. And it can even be visible during the day. Probably didn't show up in the camera though. It's got a LED light inside it. And it's got an ordinary light bulb on top. This has a three-way switch. The first setting turns on the light and the rotating beacon. The second one turns the beacon off but keeps the light on. And the third one turns only the beacon on.
Yeah, as far as 25 degrees, put it in for 15 minutes.
Alright.
Just sitting in the dark.
I'm just recording it. It's so bright.
Free advertisement.
What? Free advertisement?
Free advertisement. It's more powerful than the wood outside.
That's because it's electric and not solar power. And of course this setting turns them both off. The light turned on at 6 o'clock in the evening and it turned off at 6 o'clock in the morning. You might think that's not very prototypical because it's still nighttime, but actually this is very realistic to how real lighthouses that are automated function. Real lighthouses that are automated turn on when it's too dark to see the pattern painted on them, which usually happens just after the sun has completely set below the horizon. They turn off right when the sun starts to illuminate the sky, so it's still going to be pretty dark when they turn off, but there's still going to be another light source from the sun. At this point, it is bright enough that you can tell that it is a red and white lighthouse, so there is no longer a need for the light, and so it turns off. Recently, this lighthouse was hit with a really tough test. Can it survive a snowstorm, especially a snowstorm that we get in the Lehigh Valley? Currently dealing with a winter storm, and this lighthouse is still working. The solar panel was buried in snow all day that day because I was at work and couldn't free it at the time, but it still got enough charge to stay on all night the following night. And that is because these solar panels actually use similar technology to what real solar-powered lighthouses use, and those lighthouses can go for several days without a full charge and still have enough power to stay on all night. In fact, every time when someone tries to tell me that solar power isn't viable, I always name drop a few lighthouses in Alaska, Maine, and the Great Lakes that don't get a lot of sun during the winter months, but they still have enough power to stay on all night. A lot of snow got on the lighthouse, but none of it got inside where the lighting fixture is located. Even if it did though, these lighting fixtures are really strong, so they likely would have survived either way. The lighthouse was buried a quarter of the way up in snow, yet it's still functional. That wire that runs from the solar panel to the lighthouse is currently surviving the ultimate test right now. It is currently submerged in 6 inches of snow and it's still functional. Not only that, but the snow is starting to melt, so the wire isn't just being submerged in snow, it's also being submerged in straight up water. I can't wait to see how this lighthouse holds up against severe thunderstorms that we tend to get here in the Lehigh Valley.